And really tying all this together was the International Polar Year, and we had those people who are most invested in taking the human exploration and learning from those who have experienced Mars through Phoenix and those who have experienced the terrestrial South Pole by actually living there.
Well, I can say that going out in the cold every day, you do adapt and you wear the correct clothing to stay warm, but believe it or not, that minus 80 C or the low temperature I've seen is minus 110.7. We still go out to our experiments every day, which are distances up to a mile each way, and I think people are pretty adaptable, and we have no problem going out. So I think it's something that once you experience it, then you realize that you can do it, and you can get used to having 6 months without the sun. So it's probably maybe surprising to you, but once you've done it for a few years, it's actually pretty easy.
From Christchurch, you hop across the Southern Ocean down to McMurdo, and then you spend some time at the coastal base, and it's beautifully stunning. There are mountains, there are whales, there are seals, seabirds. It's stark, but nonetheless visually very rewarding. And by this time, you think you've become pretty hardy. You're living in Antarctica, you've got used to the cold, you're breathing that clean but crisp Antarctic air every day. And then you get in this aircraft and you fly another 3 hours to the South Pole, rising 10,000 feet in elevation as you go. And you get there, and they open the doors, and you put on your parka, and you put on your headgear, and you step off the plane and you take your very first breath. And all you can think about is, oh, it's cold. The lungful of air, the first lungful of air that you take at the South Pole is minus 50 degrees. And that's warm because it's the beginning of the summer there. It's the coldest thing you've ever experienced. And it feels almost as if you will not take a second breath, but you do. And over the coming weeks, you get used to living there, and you get used to the altitude, and used to the cold weather, and used to the absolute emptiness of the place. There are no trees. There are no hills. There are no houses except for the 3 or 4 scattered buildings that were put there for scientific research. And as you look out to the horizon in 360 degrees, you just see a white expanse, the Antarctic plateau extending to some unimagined infinity, with a blue sky that meets it somewhere out there that you'll never get to. And civilization doesn't exist anymore. And you've become a whole world unto itself. The people at South Pole essentially lived at another planet. It was like unlike any other place on Earth. And I was privileged and had a wonderful time doing that for a year. One might ask whether I would do it again. And I would have to consider very carefully before going down that path again, because it really is a life-changing experience. But it takes you so far out of your comfort zone, and there's no Starbucks that you can get in the morning. There's no television that you can flick on to see what's happening in the presidential debates. You really are isolated. You can't pick up and say, hey, I'm going to go to the beach today, or I'm going to go hiking today. You're really constrained with what you can experience. And so it really becomes internalized. You have to make life come out of what you can create in a small box, which is your room, or in the dining facility, or out of the telescope that you work on. And really that's it. Life is very bounded, not unlike what life must be like living aboard a spaceship, and you're constrained to be in close quarters with the same people every day. There was one time I was working on the telescope, I had just a narrow 20 minutes of time to get some changes made, and I was working outside, so I had my cold weather gear on and my goggles and my gloves, and it was about minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but you can only work so quickly with gloves on. So it's quite acceptable to take your gloves off for a short period of time. A short exposure to cold is not going to cause your fingers to drop off. But I was working on a metal ring, and I had removed the very last bolt that was holding it in place. And as it fell, I grabbed it. And I realized I was holding a piece of metal that was minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So I put it down, and I felt no pain whatsoever, but recognized it was time to go inside and figure out what I had done to my fingertips. So I went inside, and there were my fingertips, and they were white, completely and utterly white, frozen from the pads to the fingernails. Didn't hurt a single bit. Didn't hurt because they were completely frozen, but over the next minute or so they began to thaw out. And this excruciating pain went through my fingertips, and it took weeks to actually, for that pain to go away and for me to get sort of the normal sensation back in my fingers. But for years since, whenever I've held a cold drink in my hand, I get this tingling sensation as the blood rushes to my fingertips and says, "No, not again!" And I think that every time I hold a cold drink, I remember my time at the South Pole, and in particular that incident.
Okay. My name is Suzanne Douglas, and I work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. I'm a geomicrobiologist, which means that I study the interaction between microorganisms and rocks. And I was invited to be on the Phoenix Team Antarctic trip as a biologist in order to learn about microbes that may live in the soils in the Antarctic dry valleys. In Antarctica, we went to 2 different dry valleys. One was a low elevation coastal region valley. It was about 100 meters elevation. And those soils are pretty much like the Arctic, and people know there's a lot of microbes in the soils. We also went to a high elevation Antarctic dry valley where people know barely anything about microbes in the soils. And specifically what we were interested in was learning if there's any life forms living right at the ice table in the soil. So we dig down until we reach ice, which is ice-cemented soil, and then we collected samples all the way down at different elevations, different depths in the soil profile, till we got to the ice table, and that specifically was what we were interested in studying. Well, an extremophile is an organism that lives in conditions different than what humans like. So to us it seems really extreme, but because the organism has adapted to that environment, it's quite comfortable there. So it's only an extremophile in our eyes. But an extremophile, is an organism that lives in an environment that we look at and go, how could anything live there? And the Antarctic dry valleys, the high elevation ones, which I'd like to distinguish from the low elevation ones, and which we were focusing on, are very, very dry. They have like single-digit relative humidity sometimes. It varies. And they're very, very cold. So the soils in the valley that we studied, which was called University Valley, that's the one we focused on, they never get above 0 degrees Celsius. And especially down at the ice table, which was our main area of interest because the conditions are so dry and so cold that you don't expect traditionally that there should be anything there. So right now we're working on publishing the findings of this work, and it's due to come out soon.